From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us. Here's what's coming up. Opening the floodgates, Turkey's president threatens to send millions of refugees to Europe in response to EU criticism of its Syrian offensive. Streaming violence, calls for action after more than 2,000 people watch an anti-Semitic attack in Germany live online. Saudi tourism, why one of the world's most conservative countries is opening its door to foreign visitors. Biki backlash, outrage against a Belgian burger company that appeared to make light of domestic violence. And Raw Goodbye, a look back at the best of Raw Politics as we sign off one last time. Good to have you with us. It is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, what are you watching
This is it. Well, I'm watching Us for the final time. And after, hundreds of shows, I think possibly even thousands of guests the last hour. And I hope this hour is as entertaining and as informative as all the ones we've had before.
Indeed. All right. Also joining us tonight, Alice Kuhnke is a Swedish MEP and Vice Chair of the Greens EFA Group. What about you, Alice? What are you watching tonight?
I'm watching everything about Brexit.
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 When will it end? Yes. I mean, we've done so many Brexit shows, haven't we? And in that year that we've been here. Okay, and also joining us tonight, Dharmendra Kanani is Director of Insights at Friends of Europe. What about you, Dharmendra? What are you watching?
For this final show, first, thank you for having me on your... It's an honour to be on this final show. I'm going to be looking kind of carefully at the Syria-Turkey issue and the Trump triangle.
All right. I mean, that is exactly where we are beginning this evening. Turkey threatens to, quote, flood Europe with millions of refugees if the EU labels a Turkish military operation in northern Syria an invasion. Well, addressing his ruling AK party earlier today, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan defended his country's military action in the region in the face of mounting international criticism.
Kendinize gelin. Bak yine söylüyorum. Bizim şu andaki operasyonumuzu bir işgal hareketi diye nitelendirmeye çalışırsanız işimiz kolay. Kapıları açarız. 3,6 milyon mülteciyi sizlere göndeririz.
His comments come as thousands of Syrian Kurds living in the area are fleeing for their lives as Turkey ramps up its long-threatened military offensive, targeting key Kurdish positions in the northeast of the country with airstrikes, as well as advancing ground forces. Well, the UN warns that some 1.7 million people could be at risk. A part of Operation Peace Spring, the move has stunned Europe and been condemned by America. And coming just days after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a withdrawal of troops from Syria. Well, to get more on the situation on the ground, we're joined from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan by NBC correspondent Matt Bradley. So, Matt, you know, these comments by Erdogan opening the floodgates, millions of refugees he threatened to allow into Europe. I mean, is this a real threat? What sense are you getting there that this threat is real, or is it posturing?
Well, it's absolutely real, Tessa, because, you know, this isn't the first time that Erdogan has wielded his refugee population as a cudgel, as a way to manipulate governments who are neighboring to him. You know, he's always used this, and in fact, he's used it as a way to make deals like with Angela Merkel way back in 2015, 2016. So this isn't the first time that he's exploited what really, for Turkey, has been quite a big burden for them. They have something like 6.5 million Syrian refugees that they're hosting there. And that is one of the reasons why they're launching this incursion today. And this is now 24 hours into that incursion. You know, the stated goal of this is to repopulate northern Syria with the Syrian population that was in Turkey. Some 2 million of that 6.5 million. So, I mean, he really is moving refugees around the world like chess pieces. And while that seems terribly cynical from maybe where you and I are standing, it is consistent with what he's been doing in the past. And it probably is popular in Turkey, where a lot of people feel as though Turkey has really carried the burden of the Syrian refugee situation for the rest of the world. But, you know, Turkey isn't alone. Countries in Europe, as you know very well. Lebanon has maybe 1 million out of its 4 million population that is handling refugees. And the problem one of the problems, along with the massive violence that we're seeing in northern Syria right now because of this incursion, is that it's just creating more refugees, more internally displaced people. As you mentioned now, 100,000 people who have been uprooted from their homes and are now fleeing to destinations that we don't know. They could be headed here in northern Iraq, and the Kurdish population here in northern Iraq, they're not going to be so pleased about having yet another burden of a massive influx of people from foreign countries. And UNHCR, the UN High Commission of Refugees, just came out with a statement saying that this is going to really test their resources in northern Syria, because some of their aid workers have already left their positions in the many, many refugee camps in that area. And that, it's really hot right now here, Tessa, but winter is fast approaching, and that could be a major problem for that huge new refugee population. Tessa?
And Matt, another development we're hearing from the region is that the U.S. said that two high-profile British IS fighters were taken into U.S. custody, and Trump had said that he's taken the worst of the worst. Can you tell us more about that? I mean, does removing them actually remove the threat of a resurgent, foreign fighters?
No, and Tessa, I've been reporting on Islamic State for quite a while. The idea that these two foreign fighters, just because they're so high profile, somehow constitute the greatest threat of ISIS is almost laughable. I mean, ISIS didn't create a caliphate the size of Great Britain that straddled Iraq and Syria for several years because of two guys. I mean, that's impossible. So the idea that they've just taken custody of these people, in a way, is a tacit admission of the idea that this Turkish incursion that Trump really did greenlight into northern Syria, it's a tacit admission that it is actually going to be unleashing a lot of Islamic State militants, or could unleash a lot of Islamic State militants, both into northern Syria and to points further afield, maybe here into Iraq, maybe into Europe. So by saying that, he really is saying that by passing custody of this enormous ISIS population, we're talking about something like 12,000 hardened fighters over from Kurdish custody into Turkish custody, that's going to be very disruptive and could potentially unleash, yet again, a new ISIS population into the region. They could use this to try to reform that caliphate that was only ended back in March. Tessa?
All right, thank you for that. Matt Bradley, NBC correspondent, talking to us from Kurdish-controlled Erbil there. And here in Brussels, there was a strong message to Turkey. So let's take a look at just what the EU had to say to Turkey, which may have sparked a strong reaction. Its Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini urged an immediate end to hostilities and questioned Turkey's planned safe zone, saying the EU would not fund it.
The European Union will not provide stabilization or development assistance in areas where the rights of local populations are ignored or, even worse, violated. The Syria conflict will not be ended by weapons. This war can only be ended by mediation and the true reconciliation within the Syrian society.
So there was Federica Mogherini there. All right, this is a complicated situation. Matt Bradley tried to paint us the picture there. Okay, I'll start with you, Dharmendra. Erdogan talking about this threat of opening the floodgates. This is real too, as I asked Matt.
Matt was absolutely right. It's absolutely serious. Look, Europe did a dirty...
Despite all the money that's already gone to Turkey.
Indeed. Indeed. But once you do a dirty deal, i.e. you pay off a leader to say, actually, we'll give you this much money to make sure you stave off, a bad continues to be bad, and he knows that. He can play that game again. But the real issue here, I think, is that we know that we need to have a better international burden-sharing situation here. We know Turkey's got huge amounts of, millions. Lebanon has millions. And actually, I think we need to think about the comparators of his narrative, though he's talking about Europe, with Trump. Let's not forget Trump's role in this. By what he's done in the past 24, 48 hours is a classic delinquent foreign policy driven by a fanatical America First approach. And you could see the signs in what Erdogan is saying, actually, this is not, I can't share this anymore. Europe, you take some control. So the issue for me, though, is that what is Europe, NATO, and other international bodies going to do about this? And actually, this is a human rights crime. This isn't going to go away.
Can I just put that? But the deal that Europe did initially with Erdogan, which is kind of part of this process now, that was Europe putting itself first. Yeah. That was Europe essentially saying, we're not going to take responsibility for this. So let's not just paint a Trump White House and Erdogan and Turkey as kind of the bad guys in all of this. Europe has to take some form of responsibility for where we are now.
Exactly.
Not least of all because actually they've negated the fact that they've just not been involved at all.
No.
So you think
essentially
Erdogan
in
has
this
a
area.
point?
No, but
Okay.
I totally agree. I mean, this is really time for us, for EU, to do its homework. I mean, we are learning a lesson. If you play with persons and political leaders like Erdogan, this is what it ends up with. I mean, we are so bounded now with our hands on the back because he has this threat towards us. I mean, and when you're looking at his speech and the applause and everything, I mean, you feel disgusted because, I mean, this is a leader that you don't want to be involved with.
You think he has all the leverage? In fact, Erdogan has all the leverage because by reneging on essentially a deal, on a promise, isn't that also shooting himself in the foot? Because then in the future, how will the EU deal with him? Or does he have all the power?
I mean, I think he believes, and obviously he has a lot of power because he knows what crisis the EU are in. I mean, he knows that we can't I mean, we don't have a common voice speaking when it comes to having a fair system, when it comes to taking care of people who are fleeing from all over the world. So, of course, he has a lot of powers.
Do you agree?
As I said, bad continues to be bad in terms of the deal. And I agree with you, Darren, that was a kind of a Europe first kind of approach in the deal that they've all striking. But the fact is, the EU has a set of principles and its kind of goals are different to Turkey and the States. Now, what I think Ursula von der Leyen and others have to do in the new Commission is really think hard about actually what role are they going to play in international foreign policy and put their money where their mouth is in terms of human rights and promoting liberal democracy. And I think here the issue will be, can they wield some influence to actually sort this out or even work multilaterally? Because Trump isn't going to play, Turkey isn't going to play, but actually there are other players who can and will if Europe takes a lead.
Speaking of Donald Trump, I mean, he tweeted this afternoon in several tweets that were slightly inconsistent in the sense that, you know, he's arguing that he wants to end these endless wars. He doesn't want troops there, but goes on to say that let the Kurds fight their own battle, even without financial help.
Is he saying that?
Well, at the same time, he's saying also at the same time he will hit Turkey very hard financially and with sanctions if they don't play by the rules.
Well,
I'm watching closely.
They've already done the incursion,
Well,
which he threatened.
Isn't this the problem? He is just so inconsistent that, you know, these tweets sum up the kind of, I'm kind of on the side of the Kurds, but I'm not.
No, exactly.
And I will look after Turkey closely, but I'm clearly not.
And having an American president tweeting about let the Kurds fight their own war, I mean, when the US have been, I mean, they have done this against the Kurds so many times. It's just one time enough
both
now.
leaders,
but what about...
I'm going to say, both leaders are, and I think they're consistent. I think the point you make is a valid one, but actually, he's consistent. He's playing to an American audience about his foreign policy.
Okay,
but both those tweets speak to the man on the street, basically.
But isn't that the point? The point is that whether experts, the people who are in that region, we or anyone else or the MEPs here dislike it, is that to a large degree in the United States, and I would also argue in Europe, that policy of staying out of wars that we all got involved in the past, that is popular with the public, and there is this disconnect. And with all the politicians who complain about it here in other European capitals about what Donald Trump is doing, they also know that lots of their voters agree with the US president.
But just very quickly on the EU's response when we hear Mogherini there with funding, sort of using this as leverage funding. Is that a real leverage? From the EU's point of view, the money?
Well, of course you can follow the money. It's one tool. But I think that we also need to do, as you said, we need to look at all institutions and all, I mean, also national, as a countries working with Turkey in different ways, because this is in all our interest that this get an end to this before the bloodbath is really...
This problem isn't going to go away, regardless of whether it speaks to the voter. The voter will be impacted. If Europe does nothing about this, we'll have the same arguments about being flooded, the EU will still fall apart and say, we're not going to burden share, and there'll be no strategic approach to this. This is a human rights crime. This is a human tragedy.
It's a breach to international law.
But the fact is that international institutions, Europe should take a lead and say, let's try and sort this out once and for all. It is a smoulder keg because you've got Iran, you've got Russia, and you've got the States. But actually, once and for all, how long are you going to create this human suffering of millions of people, which will end up in Europe, whether we like it or not?
Well, there you go. And Erdogan was saying that his goal was that corridor to, you know, let
he'll manipulate that corridor. Absolutely.
Of people through. Okay, a story certainly that's going to get bigger. Now let's move to London, though, because after a make or break, what's being dubbed as a make or break meeting between British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Irish leader Leo Varadkar, there's, quote, a possible pathway to a deal. Well, that's a big thing there. Vincent McAviney, our correspondent, is joining us now to give us all the latest on this. Vincent, I mean, this, after all that, is there a possible way forward? We're seeing a possible pathway. Tell us about this.
Tessa, well, this meeting between Prime Minister Johnson and the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar took place today here in the northwest of England, and the media were being kept away and expectations were being managed. And I think that was probably the right thing to do, because basically what we're left with this statement is that little buffering wheel that spins around on your laptop. It is diplomatic speak for we didn't agree anything and we're going to keep going and seeing what happens. If you look at the statement, it says that there were detailed and constructive talks all about the Northern Irish border. That solution put forward by Prime Minister Johnson last week, not acceptable, it seems, to Dublin of having two borders, one in the Irish Sea, one on land, for about 4 years. And they've said both continue to believe that a deal is in everybody's interest. While there's some question mark as to whether or not that's the case today here, discussions that Boris Johnson might be writing a no-deal general election manifesto. And it goes on to say they could see a pathway for a possible deal, and they had to discuss they're going to have further reflections on their discussions as officials continue to work. I think that basically means they didn't come to any agreements. It looks like a bit of a wasted trip for both leaders, and now it remains to be seen, with the clock ticking down, that deadline that France set, wanting those details by Friday. Well, that looks like it isn't going to be met.
So, Vincent, what happens next then? What are we looking out for?
Well, the statement says that the British Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay will be meeting Michel Barnier tomorrow morning in Brussels to continue those technical talks, although those don't seem to be generating much sort of movement. And then we've got a really dramatic week next week, because we've got the Queen's speech taking place on Monday, all the pomp and ceremony of that. Boris Johnson will write a speech for the Queen that she has to deliver with all his domestic priorities. We could see, though, some big disruption coming from the Extinction Rebellion crowd that's down there. Then there's still a question mark about Boris Johnson, whether he will go to the EU Council meeting or not, if he's going to turn up there in Brussels, if a deal's been done. Then he could also possibly, I've got to say, lose that Queen's speech vote for the first time since the 1920s. And then it all comes to a head next weekend, when there'll be a massive protest in London by both Remain and Leave groups. They're expecting tens of thousands of people as Parliament sits for only the 5th time since 1939 on a Saturday. The scale of this crisis at that point, I mean, those times it's met on the Saturday was for World War II, for the Suez Crisis and the invasion of the Falkland Islands. So it is going to be a pretty dramatic week next week, and I'm just sad that you guys aren't going to be on air for it anymore with your fantastic show to talk about it all.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Vincent. They're bringing us the latest on what's happening with Brexit there. And with us here in the studio to discuss this is Samir Rafaela, a Dutch MEP with the Renew Group, as well as Billy Kelleher, an Irish MEP also with the Renew Group, and James Crisp joining us, the Brussels correspondent for The Telegraph. All right, this possible pathway, do you believe that, James?
No, I think it's garbage, to be honest. I think the idea... Look, OK, yes, there's a possible pathway to a deal. There's a possible pathway to the moon. You know, we're not necessarily going to find this possible pathway, and we're certainly not going to find it by the end of this week. And we're certainly not going to find it by October the 17th, when the EU summit happens. The gaps between the two sides are too large. I think actually everyone knows that, but we're going through this ridiculous theatre in order to create a sense of momentum before what I think is the inevitable extension, or if things go terribly wrong, no deal.
All right. Do you think any of the question marks have been any clearer to you, Samir, since we last talked, perhaps?
No. I mean, and we need to stay clear-headed here. Also, keep the eyes on the ball. I mean, if we look at his behavior, the recent weeks, the recent months, we have all the reasons to worry. He is not showing that he's acting in good faith. He's ignoring parliament, trade, unions, business, the rule of law, and most of all, he's ignoring people, a number of people, in favor of remaining, in favor of staying in the European Union. And in any way, he's showing that he's not taking it seriously and that he does not respect the public opinion. He's ignoring it all, and the rule of law, everything.
I mean, the optics of Boris Johnson meeting Leo Varadkar also, I think, is important here, that being the sticking point. Do you think Ireland can power play this? I mean, what card does Ireland hold here and the power that Ireland holds in this?
Well, look, I mean, it's the UK will be negotiating with the European Union. We're part of the European Union side. I mean, clearly they will take into account the impact that a no deal or a deal, if it is to be trashed out, will have on the island of Ireland. I mean, no country more so than Ireland wants a deal. If the UK is to leave the European Union, we want to see them leave in an orderly manner that doesn't impact dramatically on the island of Ireland, both in economic terms, but politically as well. And that is the clear issue that
but there's got to be compromise. I mean,
of course, and
Ireland hasn't moved on any of its positions so far.
Well, Ireland's position is Europe's position, and the compromises have already been in place, and they were tailored into the original Theresa May deal. The fact of the matter is, it's not it's the UK is leaving the European Union, so it is they will have to make compromises beyond what the European Union has already compromised on. I think there's been too much megaphone diplomacy in the last couple of days. I think a lot of it's just been choreographed by the various groupings to make themselves look good or make themselves look like victims. But the important issue from our perspective is to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement, which is a peace process, is not undermined. And a hard border, either by a crash out or by the fact that they can't come to some formal arrangement, will be a major part in undermining that peace process.
So, James, when the summit comes along next week, how will you be covering this? I mean, you will be watching this closely, but okay, the deal that Boris Johnson came here. What are you even going to be reporting?
Story, you know. I mean, the British Prime Minister goes into the lion's den in Brussels to battle for Britain and either be humiliated or emerge victorious. I mean, look, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Boris Johnson goes in. We have a Salzburg-style situation where the leaders say, look, the gaps are too big, you know this. And then, he can storm out, he can turn to the cameras and go, oh, well, I've done my best, now I have to let Parliament...
You think that's likely, those rumours that he could,
I mean, because that'd be great. I mean, it'd be great for him because, despite, the numbers of people who do want to remain, there are also a lot of people who want to leave. And most people will enjoy seeing him sticking it to Brussels and then storming out. There was a mixed reaction when he had to flee Luxembourg. I thought it was ridiculous and humiliating. A lot of readers got in touch and said they thought it was great. Why waste our time? So, but then he has that narrative going.
How do you react with this kind of expectation of what the British Prime Minister could possibly do and set the narrative?
It's the election campaign.
Right.
Well, but this is happening all the time. I mean, he's showing consistently that he does not know what he's talking about. I mean, come on, let's not act as if he's a mastermind. He's not. He's not elected. He does not have a mandate. And this is the situation all the time. He's not clear. He's not communicating well. But most important, he's not communicating honestly. He's not telling the real story here. So we can expect everything. But again, keep the eyes on the ball. We need to stay really clear and sharp.
Do either of you have any high expectations for the summit, to be honest?
Well, in my view, I think the primary purpose for Johnson's positioning is the next election. I mean, you have to take into account he is trying to mark the Brexit party, and in polling, they're polling 12-14% at times. So he has to ensure that he keeps the Tory hearts with him and also win that Brexit party vote as well. So that's what he's positioning himself for. But in the meantime, the risk is that you could do untold damage between the UK and the European Union and untold damage on the island of Ireland.
All right, well, for now, all we know is that there's a possible pathway, which James is very sceptical about. OK, coming up on Raw Politics, burger backlash, the company under fire for showing violence against women in a hamburger ad. Plus, signing off. As Raw Politics comes to an end, we look back at some of our favorite moments. That's in tonight's Raw Moment. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Well, it has emerged that a gunman who killed 2 people at a synagogue in eastern Germany yesterday used the popular video streaming platform Twitch to broadcast the attack. Just months after a shooter in Christchurch, New Zealand, used Facebook for a similar broadcast. Well, Alex and our team in the Cube has been looking into this. Alex.
Tessa, yesterday was the holiest day of the year for Jewish people, and in Germany, it was this day that an attacker chose to try and enter a synagogue. Now, while they failed to gain entry, this eyewitness video shows you the rampage they went on afterwards. Let's show you this. It was taken by an eyewitness. We spoke to their wife in the Cube. They said they heard a commotion on the street, pointed out of the window and saw this man in olive green combat uniform here walking with a weapon. We know 2 people lost their lives. The synagogue was the first target of this individual before they went on to attack a kebab shop. Walking down the street there, meaning there were 2 crime scenes. 2 people killed. Other people reported injured in what German authorities have called an anti-Semitic far-right attack. In fact, the Interior Minister, Horst Seehofer, saying the risk of far-right terror in the country is high. But one thing you'll notice from that video, I think, is on the top of the helmet, while it's blurry from the eyewitness video, you can see there's some device there. We know that this video was live streamed by the shooter. He went on a 35-minute shooting rampage, aiming to broadcast all of it. And he chose a popular gaming site called Twitch. Twitch is where gamers all around the world share games, share feeds, interviews with each other. It is never designed for this. But as you can see here, the platform vulnerable to being used by an individual. Before he went on the shooting, well, I can tell you he spoke about his manifesto. He denied the existence of the Holocaust and said some awfully anti-Semitic things. Then he went on trying to massacre people. Now, Twitch, the video site, saying that they acted quickly once it was flagged, but they said it was 30 minutes before it was flagged. A version of the video was archived, and it is that version that was ripped and downloaded and shared. I can say in the Cube we found it in multiple sites. In fact, we're still seeing people sharing versions of that video on platforms like 4chan and through sites like Telegram, that is an encrypted messaging app. Now, Twitch here very quickly saying that they are working with other industry partners to try and deal with this, because by no means are they the only platform that has dealt with this. Of course, in Christchurch, New Zealand, the attacker there using Facebook's live video stream to document their horrific attack. Now, it's worth noting after Christchurch, we of course had world leaders come together with the Christchurch call, calling for platforms to take action. But as the news editor of Storyful, an online news gathering site, said, it's showing how vulnerable these things are to manipulation by extremists, far-right extremists, calling on social media companies to do more. And indeed, you get a sense of the frustration and the anger of the Jewish community in Germany, saying it was miraculous that more people were not killed. Angela Merkel gathering with leaders in the country to say these kind of attacks have no place in the country. Well, I can say that people online saying these kind of attacks have no place on streaming sites, and more needs to be done to stop this happening again.
Thank you for that, Alex, and our team in the Cube. And joining us here in the studio to discuss this is Michael Bloss, a German MEP with the Greens EFA Group, and Jennifer Baker, a tech expert and EU affairs journalist, and back with us, Dharmendra Kanani from Friends of Europe. Okay, it happened in Germany, so I'll ask you about this, the streaming of the crime. There's a certain notoriety that's attractive to people who commit these crimes. Do you think that, to what extent should the platform Twitch be held accountable for what happened?
Well, first I want to say that this happening in Germany on this day against Jewish people is terrible, it's shocking, it's troubling me. And I think what we have to do is to make sure that Jewish people can live safely in Germany, and that we really have a huge problem with right-wing terrorism in Germany. And this has to be dealt with. Then talking about the streaming lines, it's sure that big companies, tech companies, YouTube, Facebook, they have to do more themselves to avoid such things. They have to have better security regulations, but also the police enforcement, they have to have the capacities to deal with such online, attempts to broadcast it. Because one of the problems is that the terrorists themselves, they do it also.
There are two things
online.
that you bring up there. It's the ideology, and then there's the platform that fuels and pushes this ideology forward. So how you say something has got to be done, then what? And which one do you tackle first, and what should be done from a tech point of view as well?
But I think the tech platforms are not responsible for these horrible hate crimes. We need to tackle the crime first. No, at all. You described it as a popular platform. It's actually not that popular. Twitch is not something that's commonly used by people day to day. It's a gamers predominantly platform. Without wishing to cast aspersion on that particular community, there are places, we all know them, 8chan, 4chan, Gab, where this kind of right-wing extremism does fester. And, these platforms, you again said it was manipulated. It wasn't manipulated. It's supposed to be used that way. The problem is the individual behind these attacks and what's going on in their heads, not the fact that it's streamed. I don't think we need to turn this into a tech problem. This is a fundamental societal problem.
But then a lot of... I was looking at a list, actually, here of all the crimes that were streamed. There are rapes, there are stabbings, there are obviously the Christchurch attack, and then now in Germany. Should there be a question of regulation or even banning? Isn't that a valid argument to have, just to put forward on the table? Dharmendra?
From my point of view, and I understand what you're saying, but actually, the reality is, digital is a force for good and bad. On this occasion, it's a force for bad. We know that. And policy making isn't catching up with the pace of change. We have seen in the past 18 months this kind of thing happening on... Imagine children accessing that and watching it. It numbs you to violence in a way. I think it's high time that we move from voluntary codes of effort to actually mandatory regulation. I think the EU should take a lead in this and actually create an institution that regulates this, because I think you have the technological capacity in platforms. They certainly do. They can use AI very, very specifically to tackle this issue, and they can create firewalls in different ways, and they can spot check things very quickly. So I do think, actually, that we're not living in the society that we were. We're in a new society with technology, and I think platforms have a responsibility and they need to be regulated by government.
You disagree?
I think we already have a lot of regulation against this. We have regulations against incitement to violence, regulations against hate speech. They exist. I mean, the question is how and to what degree do you implement them? And you have to decide, where do you start putting, infringements on people's right to expression and people's legitimate use of these platforms to circumvent the few nut jobs.
Right, so what is your position on that? Because you, again, in terms of dealing with the technology in relation to the ideology fueling it.
No, I agree that I agree it's both. We have to tackle the ideology. There is a huge problem with the way we talk with each other. Hate speech is a problem. That we talk about migrants is a problem that fuels this kind of thing. But then also the big companies, they themselves, they can do more. They can establish in their departments, they can just invest more in preventing this themselves. It doesn't have to be kind of regulation or upload filters, but the companies, they are also responsible for what is happening on their platforms.
Okay, well, let's move on now, because the EU has been grappling with a very different technological question as well. Let's take a look. "5G. It promises to revolutionize our lives, speeding up mobile data connectivity. But could it come at a cost? And could it put our national security at risk?" Well, the EU is sounding the alarm, warning that an over-reliance on a single supplier could see Europe's 5G networks face attacks from state-backed hackers. The report said that non-EU businesses hoping to build 5G infrastructure could be subject to interference from a non-EU country, which operates under systems with no legislative or democratic checks and balances in place. The publication did not mention China or Huawei by name. However, it's being seen as a tougher stance from Brussels on emerging Chinese technology giants such as Huawei. The company responded, insisting that it's a private firm owned by its employees and has cybersecurity as a top priority. But the move spells trouble for Huawei and follows on from Washington's warnings that Huawei's dominance could pose a danger for national security. So they didn't mention Huawei, but how worried should we be of Huawei? Should Europe be?
Well, I think we should be worried because this is a central technology that we are building up. And if there is a company that is legally required by its country to give away data, then it's a problem for us.
So you see it as a threat?
I see it.
That happens actually in European countries as well. There's a whole debate going on about data retention at the moment. But I would say I'm quite delighted by this because it's exactly what I said to you, Tessa, on this sofa a few months ago. No backbone infrastructure should be wholly reliant on a single provider. That's just good cybersecurity. And the problem is that we've got in this marketplace these switching technologies, this real backbone. It's not your devices, it's the backbone of the telecoms industry and the telecoms.
And it's just preventing a monopoly in general.
But the problem is we've only got Huawei, Ericsson and Nokia. I mean, it's a very small market. So what we should be doing is looking
encouraging more players, plurality in the market.
But also, don't forget, this technology has been developed over years. Huawei has been a world leader, cheaper, faster and better, and Europe's been knowing about that. This is a political issue and geopolitical issue that's been created by Trump and others. Why would we say 5 years ago and not now? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Obviously, we need checks and balances. And actually, we've got the technical know-how to create that. This is a political issue about a Chinese company.
So there should and also probably should be more European companies out there. OK, coming up on Raw Politics, planning your next vacation? Well, Saudi Arabia opens its doors to tourists for the first time. What's driving the move? That's up next.
Saudi. visa now.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Well, Saudi Arabia is open. That's the message the kingdom is trying to send to the world as it turns to tourism to bolster economy and reduce its dependence on oil. Well, the country recently announced a new visa program for citizens of 49 countries. To encourage tourists, it will allow unmarried foreign couples to rent hotel rooms together. And this comes as the country is trying to improve its image after criticism of its poor record on human rights and its role in the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. All right, talking to us about this, back with us, Billy Kelleher, an Irish MEP with the Renew Group, and also back, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, and Jennifer Baker, tech expert and e-affairs journalist. Okay, first of all, would you visit Saudi Arabia? Would you go after seeing that? Or would you go in general, in principle?
Not because of that advert. I mean, I'm curious about it, but I suspect I would probably be one of these people who would get arrested if I, through some faux pas.
I don't know, would you?
There's no drinking. There's no drinking,
there's no drinking.
So
They didn't say
they're
that.
relaxing the rules some degree, but alcohol is still banned.
I've been to a few of the Gulf states, and I find that sort of, very insular type of thinking oppressive, being truthful, and the Saudi state, it probably is the one that's most oppressive in terms of its outlook in society. It just doesn't fit with with my comfort zone. I would be in no rush to go there on holidays, and they have an awful lot of work to do on human rights in general. I just think this is a softening face of still a very oppressive regime.
But it's very clear. I mean, the rebrand, what's
I mean, it
driving
definitely
it?
is. I mean, I have to say, I was Googling flights to go somewhere for New Year's. and
Saudi Arabia came up.
Honestly, the advertisement at the top, I did not Google Saudi Arabia, was Saudi Arabia. They have clearly pumped an awful lot of money online to try and sell it. I take a slightly different view in the thought that there is no doubt that Saudi Arabia is a repressive regime. There is no doubt that they violate human rights on an incredible level, despite the kind of some of the changes that they've made and the image change they're trying to enforce. But what I would say is actually tourism, going to countries that otherwise are shut off from tourism, and I remember going to Burma or Myanmar just after the monks' uprising, was actually an opportunity for us to get to better understand that, but also for local people, because you do interact with local people to get a better sense they might get a better sense of where you're coming from. And I think that actually tourism can provide lots of things, but it can provide for that interaction, which can be positive.
But I think what you say about, you joked about it, that, I'd probably get arrested, but actually, in the back of your head, you kind of,
I mean, there are
you
places
think about safety and...
Yeah, I mean, there are places that are just not great for solo female travellers, and I think that's extremely unfortunate that you have this whole category of countries where I think, if I'm going on my own, maybe not. Maybe I won't have a good time. Maybe I'll be too tense and worried about, the situation. Yes. And that's not good. That's not the message that we in Europe espouse.
And clearly lifting this ban on married couples does not extend to gay couples, for example.
Right.
There's no suggestion about that. So there are still massive limitations. Be no doubt, Saudi Arabia might be relaxing rules, but they're not going...
It said that you can rent a room together, but it didn't say you could use the room together.
Sure, but do you think it's a bit... You say, OK, for the benefit of the economy and the people, but on the other hand, we are actually telling politicians to not have trade ties with Saudi Arabia in order to pressure them to comply with human rights. Clean up their human rights record.
Look, there's a lot of hypocrisy, even in the context of the European Union and other countries that are still trading with Saudi Arabia, that, do not condemn some of their human rights violations. This is just a softening exercise, in my view. Saudi Arabia's had a very bad track record in recent times. The murder of journalists, just the fact that its own people are beginning to question them, their involvement in Yemen, for example, and the appalling attacks there. So they're just trying to soften their image worldwide, and this is just part of it, in my view. I welcome it. It. Anything that allows, for example, foreign visits, tourism, as was said, does break down barriers, but a lot of barriers get broken down.
But on the politics point, all I would say is that you have to detach necessarily what the government does with the people of the country and the country itself. Yes. Like, people will find what Donald Trump does abhorrent, doesn't mean that you go to visit.
So you don't think boycotting countries for tourism works? Because this is not the only country, obviously, where there are questions of, should I be going to Israel, for example, or should I be going, does boycotting the tourism of a country actually work in any way? So I see that you probably don't think so.
I personally think that there are lots of reasons why people might feel about being uncomfortable going to countries, and that is understandable. I think on a principle basis of boycotting a country because you disagree or you think the regime is awful. I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think that you should still go and see people, because you're not going there to visit the government or the country. Yeah. You're going there to visit the people of that who are often very distant from their government.
We've had European citizens who have been arrested and detained just for the act of kissing the back of a taxi. So, I mean, these things are happening and will continue to happen, in my view. I just think that people need to be cautious and understand that this is more of a PR exercise in softening the image of Saudi Arabia as opposed to any fundamental change in Saudi.
I wonder if you would go to Saudi Arabia. Well, we won't have a show anymore, but you can still use the hashtag for politics to tell us that. Okay, well, staying on the theme of advertising, we will head to Belgium now, where one fast food company is learning that not all publicity is good publicity. Let's take a look. Just weeks after people took to the streets of Paris to protest against femicide, and a month before the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Over in Belgium, the fast food company Bicky Burger has caused outrage over an ad on Facebook, which shows a man punching a woman for bringing him the wrong burger. The ad was apparently inspired by a well-known Batman and Robin meme, but it has sparked fury in Belgium and beyond. Secretary of State for Equality Nawal Ben Hamou called it sickening and sent a formal complaint to Belgium's Advertising Council, just one of 600 people to do so. Bicky Burger's owner, Good Life Foods, has since removed the post and apologized, but only after it originally defended the post by reportedly saying, "We absolutely do not want to promote women's violence and strongly reject it." I mean, you were shocked. I was also surprised when I saw that ad, wondering what went into the process of deciding how.
I cannot understand how that got through any process by anyone, the advertising agency, the company itself.
You can see how it happened, though, and you can see it's that Batman Robin thing, which is this, it's a meme for pretty much everything now. And you can see someone thought, oh, it's kind of a pop art style. Yeah, he wants his Bicky, and I guess Bicky's more aimed at men than women. Just suspect. And someone just didn't think...
Is there any way...
They got so deep into it that they didn't take a step back and say, actually, that's...
Well, there has to be someone in the process.
The most worrying point would be if it was an intentional decision of a PR company to actually put this ad out for shock.
No, but what's interesting, all of us are reacting this way, but I did show it to some other people who said, well, you know what, it's humor. It's not in great taste, but it's humor. Is there any
domestic violence isn't
justification in it? I mean, in the Batman and Robin.
Yes, I understand, but I mean, it does come across, of a woman being assaulted over a burger.
But they could have chosen a man as well.
But it's wrong on so many levels, because it's not just that. I mean, obviously, the most abhorrent bit is that you would hit a woman, but it's also that the woman should go out and get you your burger.
I know.
It's just on every single level. It's just wrong. I mean, it is just wrong. I mean, it's
diminishes the seriousness of domestic violence, in my view. Full stop.
Is this representative of any kind of mindset that's out there? Still societies that are a little bit more. I know maybe it might have been a group of people who are unaware. I don't know what went on behind that, but does it represent any mindset that's still out there in this century?
Well, it certainly does. I mean, but it's a diminishing mindset, you would hope. I mean, and particularly as Europe becomes more liberal, it certainly would be seen to be diminishing. And you've, equality, women's rights is very much to the fore. It's a political issue now that people take very seriously. Now, we've been just talking about countries that have a very different view of women's rights as well.
And last word,
Jen? The only good thing is that the outcry on Facebook made it clear it's not a mainstream opinion.
Right, well, there you go. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, as the sun sets on Raw Politics, we'll look back on our favourite moments for fiery Brexit debates, a lot of those, to epic Strasbourg stare-downs. We'll say goodbye with a trip down memory lane, and you won't want to miss Darren, of course, on this
without your helmet.
Darren and his scooter. That's coming up next. Welcome back. So as we have been mentioning all evening, tonight is our last Raw Politics show, and we did try to make European politics fun and fair. We hoped we did, and we tried to burst the Brussels bubble for you, even if it was just a little bit. So now Darren and I here are joined by Dharmendra Kanani, two of our favorite contributors, and James Chris over here. But before that, let's have a look at our favorite moments of the season. From the European Parliament in Brussels, live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics.
The trouble is, leaders have got to lead.
Populism is a problem.
Brexit is a disaster.
We are going to unleash demonic political forces.
Access. You need freedom of access.
Mr. Weber, Mr. Weber, I'll just ask you a question about what is... No. Well, part of this should be... Why not? Excuse me.
Manfred, give us Manfred.
I'll see you at the Parliament.
Take away the cars, give them the scooters.
It always takes two to tango.
Nigel Farage and Jean-Claude Juncker actually have an awful lot in common.
Indeed,
They're very similar
they
characters in many
do
ways.
like each other.
Breaking up is never easy. I know.
Jamal Khashoggi. I just can't take my eyes off that story, and the situation, of course, escalating now.
I saw a couple of police officers in front of the door. The restaurant owners have been informed to not let any of the patrons out of the restaurant.
I think that what Parliament did last night was a vindication of democracy.
Come with an alternative. Tell us what you want.
These are fake news, and that's what the Hungarian government is doing as well.
We will now not leave on time with the deal on the 29th of March.
Boris Johnson for British Prime Minister.
God, no.
I think that this European Union, as it works today, will not survive.
How many plane journeys do you take a year?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know.
I'd rather we got Brexit and I left the world of politics. But
all right.
if we're betrayed, I'm back.
People are sick and tired of your lies. People are sick and tired of your cheating.
They want to leave.
They want you to leave.
This is not a circus. This is the European Parliament.
Well, I hope you guys had fun on the sofa as well. All of our guests here. Do you have a favorite moment?
I don't have a favorite moment, actually. I think what you've just shown shows why we need raw politics. It shows the capacity and ability to have a different lens. And I think many people will miss you because you do... You come at stories not with a kind of British, French or... it's a true European lens within a global context. And I've had people come up to me in the street and say they love this show because of that. And you do burst the bubble, but you take a different take on... And you provide almost like a non-aggressive space for discussion. And I think... Being in the Parliament here, I think it's a real shame that we'll lose a raw politics perspective on politics, especially in this lovely house. And I think it's a shame. You'll be very much missed.
Oh, thanks for that, Dharmendra. And
nice.
James, you
is not
featured
going
a
to be
lot.
as nice. He's not going to be as nice.
Well, no, I mean, I think the thing which I miss the most about the show is that, let's be honest, Brussels, the EU, the institutions can sometimes be extremely pompous. Extremely self-important. And I think the thing which is good about this show is that you've punctured that slightly and maybe encouraged some of these people not to take themselves quite so tediously seriously.
Good, that's what we wanted.
And you, Darren, managed to get you on a scooter as well.
No, actually,
After your earlier comments, we had a clash about that.
I have not come to like scooters. That's one thing that's not changed on this programme. I want to say, actually, a big thank you to the team, to everyone who works behind
all of these guys that you don't see. We will not be on
the
there.
cameramen, the soundmen, our producers, Ingrid, our boss, who've made this show great. To the contributors, we've had loads of them on. And Christy, who's in Tessa here all the time. And also to you, Tessa. You have anchored this programme. And you have, provided or presided over debates and confrontations and discussions that hopefully, as I say, the people at home have found at times entertaining, but more importantly, informative and fair.
And thank you to, of course, the people who have joined us and, joined in our debates. And I also want to thank, really, the team, because we wouldn't, be able to put out this show with our producers, our writers, and the technical crew, because God knows when we started,
finally,
it was...
you guys at home for watching. Thank you very much indeed. And we're still going to be around in some
We'll still
form
be
or
trying
another.
to burst the Brussels bubble. I mean,
But
all of us
you will leave a hole. You will leave a hole because you're not going to easily find the raw in politics after raw politics goes. Let's hope you keep on doing it.
On that note, thank you everyone for watching us all this year and a month, I think. So thank you again and have a lovely evening. Bye for now. Signing off.